Okay. Remember now, the guy in the middle is the Muslim. This is Shamsi, and the guy on the right is the I don't know, is he atheist? I think he's
atheist agnostic. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. But he's Pavlov. From his accent, he's Russian or Ukrainian or something like this, and he's been there a couple.
Shamsi, and this is Pavlov. Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
Wisdom behind it, and one of them is what? When you take them, you make sure you teach about Islam, you take care of them, and you look after them without any doubt. So he is trying to. I don't disagree with you about some Muslims that do something evil, but what I disagree with James that he tried to mix and overflop a slavery European one with the Islamic one. Understand? It's not the same at all. It's not. In Islam, Prophet Muhammad said.
What's the big difference?
I'll tell you what's the difference. European slavery, they used to go enslave free people. Used to go enslave them. And
Arabs
so,
weren't.
no, I'm not talking about Islam now. We're not Arabs.
Yeah, I'm talking about Arabs.
No. I'm not a different.
Okay, I need to step in here because what Shamsi is doing is trying to differentiate between Islam, and we're talking about Islam in the first century, okay, AH, in the first Islamic century, it was Arabs. Okay, you can't deny this. What he's trying to do, he says, yeah, but today the most Muslims are in Indonesia, and therefore you can't say it was Arabs. No, we're talking about a time of like over 1,000 years ago when it was only Arabs. Okay, so we need to make.
But he's also, but also he's suggesting that these Arabs were doing something anti-Islamic or un-Islamic, right? And that, of course, is problematic. Maybe at this point. I mean, we can do it now. We can do it later. I can bring up. I've got this document on slavery here, but I think the entire thing is to distance Islam from any sort of slavery, right? So, hey, these Arabs were doing this, or here were some people claiming to be Muslim, but they weren't following the Islamic doctrine or text or whatever the case is, right? That's the whole. To my ear anyway, that's the whole approach that he's going to take here. Not to deny that there was some sort of, well, he may deny some slavery. We need to see what else he's going to say, but certainly that it's un-Islamic to take slaves.
I'm not different Arabs. I agree with some Arabs did something evil. Now Arabs are doing it. Look.
So you're saying, wait. The colonial powers in Europe enslaved all those people because of Christianity. Is that what you're saying?
Because of Christianity.
Yeah, because you don't want to say Europeans or Arabs. You want to say Muslims. Because I said Arabs and you corrected me. You told me no, not the Arabs.
No, because I would say in Christianity, in the Bible, it encourages you to enslave people.
Indeed, there is a passage of the, not the Orthodox one, the don't touch your neighbor's slave or whatever. It's part of the Ten Commandments.
No, I know Jesus said in the New Testament that if you're a slave of someone, stay a slave until I come back.
No, I mean the.
Okay, the funny thing is, I've looked for this. I have not been able to verify his claim. Is there any Christian who knows this, that Jesus actually said, because stay until I come back? I don't know this.
It's not there. It's not there. It's yet again a Muslim quoting a scripture like they do in any other scripture, whether it's the Hindu scriptures or the Sikh scriptures, making a statement, a bold statement, knowing that that it's not going to be challenged. It's the same technique that you get from your scholars for dollars from the platform. Make a statement and then move swiftly on. And hopefully somebody in the audience will catch that comment, take it as gospel, and walk away thinking that's what the Bible teaches without verifying it themselves.
Okay.
Commandments of the Catholics. Well, there's one of the commandments that says don't touch your neighbor's slave or whatever. Something like that. I actually have the Ten Commandments.
No, my point is, I'm not talking about Christianity. What I was talking
what
about,
exactly are you talking about? The Europeans and the Arabs. Is that
No. When I was talking to James, he tried to say Islamic servitude is the same as European slavery. Okay. So he tried to say Islam. If he says some Muslims, I'm not going to justify every Muslim's action. Of course, without any doubt, some Muslims out there that are
there
evil.
Are many similarities between the two. For example, Europeans could not enslave other Christians, and Muslims could not enslave other Muslims. No, that's why. Listen, and that's the example I want to give you.
You're wrong.
Wait.
And he is wrong on that. It is true that in Islam, there are instances where believing people are allowed to be taken as slavery. But then you have the same situation in the Bible where the Jews are allowed to take Jews. They just have special conditions, the same way as it's handled in the Quran. So there are different conditions for believers, as is the case for in Christianity and Judaism.
Example: when the Portuguese, they started their colonial empire, they were actually the first colonial empire. In case somebody doesn't know, they enslaved some of the blacks in Africa, right?
You're right,
They
yeah.
started trading them.
Yeah.
Correct. When they came to Brazil, they wanted to enslave the natives.
Yeah.
And the priests converted a large amount of those natives before they could be enslaved, so they would not be enslaved, because they knew what would happen to them. It would be the same thing as
So
happened
you
in
tell
Africa.
me when you
So they
came
would
to
be,
Africa, whole Africa, there was no an Africa Christian.
there weren't too many Christians in
No,
Africa.
I didn't ask you if there are too many or not.
No,
Are you saying when
okay.
the Europeans came to Africa, there was not even one nation, it was Christian nation?
No, there were Christian nations in Africa, but
And
they
did
were not
Christians-
the main. Okay, there you go.
Did the Christians
They were not. They were not the main.
Where did they come from?
You know, they were not from here. They were
Yeah.
not the victims of slavery. I know the kingdom of Makuria, which is south of Egypt. It was it was a Christian kingdom, and they actually they beat back the initial Arabic invasion, and eventually they kept being Christians. They were Coptic Christians, if I'm not mistaken. But let's not talk about that.
So what are we
because
talking about? To be honest?
we
I'm
were talking
confused.
about the comparison between the Arabic slave trade and the European slave trade.
No,
I want to tell you that it's not that different. The two are not.
No. Listen carefully. And now, when you say Arabic, as I've mentioned, I'm not here to defend what every Arab did or what every Muslim did. I'm here to defend Islam.
Okay, this is quite strange. If Muslims take Islam as a basis, and they go and they say, well, in the Quran and the Sunnah, if they are Sunnis, in the Quran, the Sunnah teaches us how to do this. And it's okay with Allah because Allah actually made slaves. And we've seen in reading the Quran last week even, we saw that there are different groups, that there are different rules for the freeman, for the female, and for the slave. We saw this. So there is no way that you can deny this. So I don't know what he's trying to do. So if a Muslim now says, well, I'm going according to the Quran, and then if I have killed a slave, then you can kill one of my slaves. That's exactly what it says in the Quran. Now, if a Muslim does that, he is going according to what the Quran says. And the Arabs were the first Muslims. So in this case, we have the Arabs who are Muslims doing what the Quran tells them. So there is no way to differentiate between any of these people. So I don't know what he's trying to do here. If he's trying to say, well, I need to have the Islamic text only, and in there that later on he's going to say, well, you see, it says there free a slave, or it is sunnah to free a slave. I don't know if this is where he's going. I forgot what the end of the video is. So for me, this is quite strange that he's trying to differentiate this here.
So let's just because he wants to defend Islam, right? And he claims that Islam does not condone or promote slavery, right? So again, I'm just going to swap over to this page here. Hopefully that's viewing to everybody. So here's some of the hadiths. There's Abu Dawud 334094. The Prophet bought Fatima, a slave which he donated to her. That's a Sahih hadith. And then we have Ibn Majah, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. The Prophet bought Safia, his wife, for 7 slaves. Another Sahih hadith. In the life of Muhammad, obviously in that's page 405, he collected them black slaves, men of no descent. Sahih Bukhari 215-103. Aisha further said, once the Prophet was screening me, and I was watching the display of black slaves in the mosque. Hadith Sahih Bukhari 991-368. A black slave of Allah's apostle was at the top, I guess that's of its stairs. If it's stairs, that doesn't make sense. Of its stairs. And then Sahih Bukhari 873-182. Allah's apostle was on a journey and he had a black slave called Anjasha. Thank you, Anjasha. And he was driving the camels very fast. Al-Tabari, the Prophet gave him a slave as a present, right? So if we take these as being true, and it carries on further down here, Sahih Muslim 3901, should I say, the permissibility of selling animals for animals of the same kind and of different quality. Allah's apostle said, sell him to me, and he bought him from 2 black slaves. Now, I can't remember, Stops, who was it that he bought here for the 2 black slaves? It doesn't say there specifically, but I'm sure you remember.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. He bought somebody specifically for the 2 black slaves. So obviously,
there's a lot of references. You have this a lot of times where somebody came to him and said, okay, what do I do with these 6 slaves? They're too much for me. I can't afford them. So he sold them, kept 2 for himself, sold 2 to others. And I mean, Muhammad was like heavy into slave trading. And it says so even in the Sunnah. If you read the biography, that he went to Syria, for example, and he came back with weapons and slaves. You know, so you can't absolve Muhammad here of anything. It's impossible. It's part and parcel of it.
Can I just bring out a point? I don't want it to be considered irrelevant, but I think it's worth adding, considering that we are talking about slavery and the mindset of Allah and Muhammad. The significance of the color of the people as well, from another point of view that Muhammad had. I just want to read a couple of surahs. This is taken from Sahih Bukhari, book 9, 89-256, and narrated by Abbas. Also said, you should listen and obey your ruler, even if he was an Ethiopian black slave whose head looks like a raisin. Okay, that's one. Then there's another one that goes down further. There are so many, but where is the other one? Yeah, this is from Ibn Ishaq. A man of Baal Jinn told me that he was told that Gabriel came to the apostle and said, there comes to sit with you a black man with long flowing hair, ruddy cheeks, and inflamed eyes like 2 copper pots. His heart is more gross than a donkey's. Then there are other ones that refer to whoever sees a black man, it's as though he saw the face of Satan. So it's when you add the identity of what Muhammad had with reference and his attitude towards black people, and how gross they were in his opinion, how less of a human being they were in his eyes, then you add that with the slavery surahs and hadith, then you're really getting a fuller picture of what the mindset was. That's why I wanted to bring it out.
Cool. Very good.
All right, shall we continue?
Yeah, go for
I
it.
said to him, Prophet Muhammad clearly said in the hadith, he said Allah will be an opponent of someone who goes and enslave 3 people. Meaning you go to Africa or you come to Europe, someone's walking, you kidnap him, and they say my slave. Because you have to know that some people are doing it in Africa. And the scholars won't against that because there's a clear hadith. And what I was talking about, that the servitude in Islam, the reason, and Islam never started this anyway, it was there already. But Islam
was there long ago.
Yeah, long ago, yeah. And I think you said that the Egyptians started it last time.
I'm not sure if the Egyptians started it,
That's
but they
what he
were
said.
one of the main, one of the
I think
first
in a way I agree with
civilizations
you.
a big
I think in a way I agree with you.
with the Egyptians. I would say that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in a way.
I think the Chinese or the the Mesopotamians had slavery. At least I don't think so. I think they had like servants or something.
Yeah,
like
that's what I'm talking about. In Islam, there's something called servants.
Exactly, slaves.
Yeah, it called servants. And Islam, those servants who we take them in a war booty, they have many ways for us to enslave, to free them. One of the ways that Prophet Muhammad said, in order for you to enter paradise, one of the path to enter paradise, to free a servant. Likewise, if imagine I say, Wallahi, I swear by Allah, tomorrow I'm going to fast, and I don't fast. So one of the options for me to expiate an oath, I have to free a servant. Understand? So there was many routes.
Yeah, stop it there. Stop. Yeah, so obviously he's changed the word to servant here, right? So that went sort of unbeknownst. But then the claim is that Muhammad said that one of the ways to paradise is to free a slave, right? Well, if that's the case, and paradise was the place that everybody wanted to go, that in and of itself should have stopped everybody from going to continue with slavery, right? If you care about paradise, that is. So firstly, we don't know if that is in fact the case. I don't know if you know of a verse that he's referring to. But even if that were the case, we also know that Muhammad traded slaves, right? So this seems like an offhand comment or something that said, even if it was in the tafsirs or the hadith of the Quran, that wasn't mandatory, and certainly people didn't seem to follow it.
But you don't know. Let's assume for a moment that Muhammad did say that. He may have said that at the earliest point of his prophethood, when he said a lot of nice things, like there's no compulsion in religion. So there are things that were later then abrogated. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, if he said that, that would be the one and only time that he ever did say something like that, because if he'd said it on numerous occasions, we'd know about it, because we'll have come across those phrases, quotes and sayings a little bit more frequently than we have done. So when you compare that with the numerous texts and verses and ayahs and surahs that talk about you can have slavery and it's okay, it's condoned, well, where do you go with what is the final answer? Do you go with the one quote that was said over here, or do you go with the 50 or 60 that was over there? And logic would dictate you go with the 50 or 60. That would be where the answer lies, not with the one isolated quote over here.
And also, of course, he traded them, didn't he? So if he was an example, then surely he would be the one teaching everybody what to do, right? You can say one thing, even if we accept that he said it, and do another, which is obviously hypocritical, right? If you say something and you expect others to follow you, and you are claimed to be an example, which Muslims claim today, then surely he would have had no slaves, right?
Exactly.
Not because Prophet Muhammad said, Abu Bakr, Umar, let us go to Yemen, let us go to Europe and just kidnap people and enslave them.
I'm not presenting.
Yes, you are.
Really?
That's why I challenge anyone to bring me one hadith, authentic hadith, or one verse says go and take people as a servant or slaves.
Okay, I think we've shown it, but also notice what he does there, okay? So this is a straw man. Give me exactly what I'm asking for these words. If you don't give me these exact words, then it didn't happen, right? And this is often used by apologists down in Speaker's Corner, right? They present straw man, which they then can quite happily knock over and say, show me, and obviously they do the same to Christians down there, right? Show me where it says this, this, and this in the Bible. If you don't show me this, then it hasn't happened, right? So they do it both ways, right? And this, of course, is a straw man, as we've shown. Here it is again, just in case you missed it. Quran 4:24. So those whom you have enjoyed sexual relations, give them the money. And it talks about, there's the tafsir from Ibn Kathir, and you're allowed to marry 4 wives and as many sex slaves as you want, right? So, I mean, now how is he going to explain these things away, or what your right hand possesses, right? And that's the key thing, isn't it? That slaves are a possession. They are your property, just like animals, or a house or a van or a caravan or whatever else you might be owning. That's exactly what they are, right?
And as Rob always said, it would have been so easy for God to say in the Quran, listen, you are never under any circumstances allowed to own another human being as an object. It would have been so easy.
But also, I think you also have to look at the dialogue as well. It says there what your right hand possesses. It's not about what you possess, it's what your right hand possesses. And why does Allah use the term what your right hand possesses? Now, why do you think that is?
Isn't that the dominant hand?
That's right. It's symbolic of being your right hand is symbolic of what's your strong arm, your possession arm. It's like, and it also signifies relationships, like he's my right hand man, meaning that's the kind of relationship that you have with that person, that he's got your back, he's got your side. You have an intimate relationship with such a person that if any situation arises, that person's going to be there for you, and you will likewise be with him. So for Allah to use the term what your right hand possesses, that's really kind of reinforcing the ownership that you have over those possessions, in this case sex slaves.
And there it is again, just in case anybody is missing it. Quran 4:3, marry women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4, or the captives and the slaves that your right hand possesses. And here is Ibn Kathir's tafsir. Allah's statement, or satisfy yourself with only female captives, for it is not obligatory to treat them equally. Rather, it is recommended, right? So it's recommended, but not obligatory.
I think that should be clear enough.
But do you think that most Muslims are going to accept this? No, probably not, right? But it's like you say, right? And the response stops to what you were saying, which is, hey, God could have come down with the first message. One of the first messages out of the cave, presuming he knew who he was speaking to, and it was clear, instead of him having to go find out from other people who they thought he was speaking to in the cave, right? Because he heard a voice. But let's put all of that aside and assume that he was actually speaking to somebody. One of the first things that you think would be a moral injunction would be the prohibition on slavery, right? And the response from certain Muslims is, but hang on a moment, Rob, That Allah didn't want to do that because look, the whole economy, part of the economy ran on slavery, right? And what happens if you remove this? How would they continue going? Because slavery was a big part of the economy. It was how they were operating in that time. And I'm listening to this going, hang on a moment, this is God, right? If God thought this was the right thing to do, then the people, and if you claim that everything's a test, then the test is to do the right thing and take the hardship, right? If this is I'm only going by what you as a Muslim claim, right? If this is all a test, then do the right thing and suffer or, labor under the test, if you like, to show that you are in fact a good person. So this whole thing of, hey, it might have impacted them negatively. Well, so what? If they were doing the wrong thing and Allah or Muhammad came along to tell them to do the right thing, then they need to suffer, right? Just like anything else. If they're doing it and it's a test, this is no excuse.
No, Islam didn't come for that. No, that's our argument. But you talk about Arabs doing evil, I don't agree with you.
I'm talking about Arabic empires and Islamic empires enslaving other peoples. That's what
I agree with you.
Let me just finish this one. Listen, even though it does state in the Bible about slavery, there are parts that speak about it. I'm not blaming Islam necessarily for saying, okay, you can go and enslave everyone. What I'm saying is, the Islamic countries did not have any opposition against the slavery that they were committing. In fact, it was well accepted inside their culture. I'm not talking about, I don't want to delve into what's written in the Bible, what's written in the Quran. That's not my main point. Which one are you talking about? History is what I'm talking about.
I understand that, but
what actually happened was that many Islamic empires committed slavery, which was not better than the European
Ottoman Empire, I believe they did something wrong as well, without any doubt. But you cannot compare the European one. Anyway, forget.
Why not?
Bro,
because the Europeans were more successful in their slaves.
No, they were successful. They started it first. They initiated it.
No, they didn't.
They did it. That's why
do you want to stop it there, Stops? I mean, that's not true, is it, as well? Yeah. The Islamic, the Atlantic slave trade was way after the Islamic slave trade started in the 600s, right? Let me read that again here.
I don't even remember when this started.
The Arab slave trade was around 600 to 1980, give or take.
But America was 1492. I mean, that's when it was discovered. So it must have been later than that. So, it's automatically later.
Yeah. So this idea that...
But the question is, were there slaves in Europe before the 10th century?
I think the word slave, doesn't it come from Slavs?
Yes.
It's actually not related to, the word originates somewhere in the Balkans, if I remember correctly. But I stand to be corrected on that. But I know.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Okay, that's the word. But the question is, were there slaves in the region? Because this I don't know. Okay, I'm too lazy now to go to Google and say who was the first slave.
Yeah, but I think his claim was that that the Atlantic slave trade was earlier, and that's simply not the case.
Right? No, that's definitely wrong.
That where a nation focused on people's skin color, and I think I have to study about European slavery more, because I never studied about it. When I did study about it, it was, to be honest, it's very, very disgusting.
Bro,
very, very disgusting. It was the law of the country.
Were sold to them by Arab merchants.
Yeah, even like, forget about the Arabs one. I'm talking about the one you go into Africa, setting up fires in villages just for the people to run away and enslave them.
Very common way of taking slaves.
Bro, I think I have to send the article. Let me send this article and study.
Not have a lot of
stop there again. This is just a matter of a tactic, right? And so this is a tu quo quo fallacy. Bringing up this is a distraction, right? Hey. We weren't the only ones doing it. There were other people doing it as well, right? So now he's going to go into talking about or at least for this moment, he's talking about the Arab slave trade. Well, none of that condones or apologizes for your slave trade. Nobody's denying that other slavery was going on. But now focusing on the other slavery as a way to distract from your slavery is not a response. Either you acknowledge you had slavery or you try and respond and claim you don't have slavery. But pointing out somebody else's slavery doesn't condone or remove yours.
Yeah, this is the point I always make. I don't care who started it. I care who ended it.
Yeah, we look at the difference. Obviously,
It's not talk about Islam. It's just talk about Arabs.
Yeah, I'm saying okay. If you talk about Arabs, then I believe
I am
Arabs
talking about the Arabs, and the Arabic culture is very much linked to Islam.
No, Arabic culture is not.
It doesn't matter what's written in the Bible or
Arabic
in the
culture
Quran.
is not.
What matters is what Muslims and Christians did throughout history.
Arabic culture
That's
is
what
not.
actually matters.
What is Arabic culture? Go on.
What is Arabic
Yeah, go
culture?
on.
It's the culture that started in Arabia, that was expanded with the Muslim invasions, with the Arabic expansions into the Middle East.
So before Islam came-
Islam and the Arabic culture are very much linked together, just like
Just
Europeans
calm
are
down,
linked
step
to
by step,
Christianity.
step by step. Can you give me an example where the Arabs, before Islam came to them, they were going to African instead of Africans?
I don't understand the relevance of this question.
Okay, so it sounds
A tactic a Muslim will employ sometimes in discussions like these is answering questions where there are no answers, because in his mind and in the audience mind that are there to back that guy, oh, the Muslim guys just answer the question and the Christian or the atheist can't answer it, so they'll score that as a point.
Let me just listen to this
With
again.
invasions, with the Arabic expansions into the Middle East.
So before Islam came-
Islam and the Arabic culture are very much linked together, just like
Just
Europeans
calm
are
down,
linked
step
to
by step, step
Christianity.
by step. Can you give me an example where the Arabs, before Islam came to them, they were going to African instead of Africans?
Where Arabs went to Africa to take slaves.
okay. So he's asking, can Pavlov, and I'm sure Pavlov's not going to be able to do it off the top of his head, name an instant prior to Islam where Arabs were going to enslave people in Africa. We'd have to look that up.
But what is the significance?
Well, exactly.
If you can, so what? And if you can't, well, so what? The point is, did Islam stop it? And that it didn't do. So, yes, it was common practice for the people at the time to take slaves, and Islam did nothing to stop it. They just fell right into step and said, yeah, just continue with it, because it was common practice. We see that in the Bible. It was common practice in those days to take slaves, and the Quran just copied it. So it didn't abolish it. It didn't say, no, you're not allowed to. It didn't say, please go and stop taking slaves. No, it gave some instructions on what to do with slaves, and if they were good and did blah, 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 how to free them or to manumit them or emancipate them or whatever you want to call it. But it didn't say stop taking slaves. Nowhere.
For Islam,
Yeah.
the Arabs did not have that power. They were very much fragmented.
No.
between each other.
They did have servants in Mecca. Like Bilal was a servant.
Okay, but it's very
Yeah,
hard.
but so
It's
what I'm
very
saying,
hard to
there
talk
was-
about.
This is quite funny, because I always get this argument, well, look what we did with Bilal. Bilal was freed and he became a caliph. So, you can go from slave to caliph. Show me this in the Christians. This is what Rob was just saying. Show me exactly the same instance. You can't do that for Christianity, so that makes Islam better for some odd reason. But they always bring this as an argument that you can go from slave to caliph. And now he says, no, he was never a slave. He was just a servant.
Arabic
There's a few reasons.
that was Arabic
Stop.
culture.
Stop for a sec. I just want to bring this up here. This is on Wikipedia around the slavery. So there's the, well, at least part of the history of it. And the Arab trade of Zanti, Bantu slaves in Southeast Africa is one of the oldest slave trades, predating the European transatlantic slave trade by 700 years. Male slaves were often forced to work as servants, soldiers, and laborers by their owners, while female slaves, including those from Africa, were long traded in the Middle Eastern countries and kingdoms by Arab and Oriental traders as concubines and servants from the 7th century. In 641, a treaty between the Nubian Christian state of Makuria and the new Muslim rulers of Egypt, the Nubians agreed to give Arab traders more privileges to trade in addition to sharing in their slave trade. So this was already in 641, after they had conquered and ruled Egypt, right? And so that was shortly after Muhammad's death. So I just wanted to add that little bit there.
Thank you. Yeah, that clarifies it. This is the problem in Speaker's Corner. You don't have the resources available to you, so you can't do this. So,
Because you say it is Arabic culture to enslave. That's not Arabic culture to
No, I
begin with.
said that Arabic culture is very much linked to Islam, because Arabic
I
culture
understand.
didn't remain exactly the same as it was before Islam. Islam changed their culture, and their
You're
culture
right.
has been changing
Yeah, you're right.
throughout
You're right.
history.
Yeah, you're right.
And what I'm saying is that eventually those changes, plus the success that the Arabic expansions have, created the Arabic slave trade, which was also linked with Islam.
For
which
example,
was
give me
not
one example.
necessarily- What example of Arabic slave trade?
Yeah.
I can give you many examples.
Just give me one. I said. Give me
Okay,
one.
one example. Let's talk about the Somalians. the Somalians, fair enough, they actually have a good point. I thought that the Somalians didn't have a point, but they do have a point. That they have a very different genetic makeup than other Africans. It is true, they are quite different from other Africans.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the Somalians did not suffer at least greatly from a slave trade. In fact, they were Muslims and they were selling other Africans into slavery to other Arabs and eventually to.
Ask him a question.
One example. You wanted one example of
Yeah,
Arabic
you're talking about again. You're talking about individuals here. You're not talking about.
What's the example you want?
I'm talking about the Islamic empire that which Muslim look up to.
The Islamic empire.
That was their main target is to enslave people. Give me an example of that.
Okay, the Egyptian Mamlukat.
The Egyptian
Mamlukat of Egypt.
The Mamalik, their main target was to go around and enslave people.
But that was not the main target. But listen, the main target.
He's not listening. So what are you mentioning then? You say.
Okay, wait. You mean that's the main target of the Europeans? The only target was only to get slaves.
That was a business. A big. That was their main business to go to Africa and enslave them. It was a big business.
Yeah, it was a big business.
That's what I'm saying. So there was no Islamic empire did that. That's my point.
Dude, most of
you have to go.
a lot of troops in the Ottoman Empire and in the Mamluk were composed by slaves. They could not have their army without their slaves.
They were composed by slaves because the Ottomans took the the people that when they took over our country, they took those kids and those people that were left over from their fathers died from war, took them to Istanbul, enrolled them into the universities, and they became the.
Okay, so this guy is justifying how they kidnapped people to try and go to take them, if I understand him correctly, to take them and to go and educate them. So he's now trying to justify this kidnapping and slavery. But hey, we took them and we educated them. Is that what I'm hearing?
We are so good to our slaves. We treated them so well.
This is sort of desperate stuff, isn't it? As if this is somehow good, that kidnapping somebody against their will and then going to teach them something that somehow makes it better.
Governors of the countries around an empire.
See, who can
that never happened in Europe.
Yeah,
that never happened in Europe.
Yeah, but
even now, the
like
black
that.
people.
Anyway, let me just clarify something. One thing I want to clarify something. I'm not blaming.
Hear me
out. I want to clarify. I want to conclude this. Yeah, I want to clarify because many cameras. When I was speaking to James or speaking about slavery, we're not blaming no one here now. I don't blame no British man or an English man or an Irish man or a French man because of something happened in the past. Because Allah told us in the Quran clearly, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. A person should not be responsible for a sin that was committed by someone else. But the reason I was talking to James, because James, one of his main targets to come to Speaker's Corner to give bad image about Islam, about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
No, stop there again. I mean, that's his opinion. James is coming to expose what Islam actually says, and he doesn't like this, so he's giving a bad image. Who says it's a bad image? Follow the Quran, follow what Muhammad said. Muhammad had slaves. Was Muhammad a bad example? Obviously not. So this is just, now he's just losing himself here, right?
Yep. And by doing that, he's also saying that anybody who quotes anything against Islam is basically plagiarizing J. Smith as well. So it's like I'm insulting J. Smith. I'm also, if anybody does any research on J. Smith and quotes J. Smith, they're just blatantly plagiarizing J. Smith. So it's like two shots with one stone.
Yeah, but this is now one of the main sort of tactics by some of the apologists and Speaker's Corner, right? Ad hominem, or put down people who are coming here to expose or to critique Islam, right? They're coming here to make Islam look bad. Well, Islam does that on its own, right? All we're doing is showing that there's these sort of verses that either Muslims don't know about or do know about and try to hide or don't care about, right? So it's not that somebody else is making it bad. All we're doing is reading or bringing up the verses as James does, and he's very good at researching these things, right? So Islam's doing this job on its own. The fact that you don't want to let people know about it, well, that we can question your motives, but it's not like somebody else is doing this. So before you carry on, Stops. Sorry. I mean, we can carry on in a moment. Reactionary is a Muslim who's watching. We've spoken to him before on other hangouts, etc. I'm sending him the link, so hopefully he'll join us momentarily and he'll give us his perspective. So he has been chatting a little bit in the link in the chat there. I've just sent him the link because I've connected with him on Hangouts. So hopefully he will join us and we'll welcome him in a minute. So carry on from there, Stops.
Don't you ever dare you to try to compare what Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions did to European slavery. That was
Okay, stop there. So,
Excuse me.
Reactionary's joined us. Reactionary is a Muslim. We've spoken before. Welcome, Reactionary. How are you?
Hello, Rob. How you doing? Hi,
Good,
Stops.
good. So,
Everyone.
if you know Stops, if you don't know
Hi, man.
Thunderous,
Hi.
is a
Hey.
Christian, also a fellow critique of Islam. So we're as you might have heard and you've been watching, I'm not sure how long, we're watching, critiquing this video of Shamsi, who appears from, certainly to my ear, at least, to be claiming that Islam doesn't condone slavery. So do you want to, before we continue with the video at this stage, do you want to come in and share some thoughts?
If it's okay, I'll just watch along with you, and I'll
Okay, cool.
add my comments along with yours, if that's okay.
All right, cool. All right,
Okay,
let's
thanks.
go.
Yeah, but I can't believe what he's doing here. Because what Shamsi is saying, once again, he is making the claim that what we just saw is not true. And that is that Muhammad eliminated slavery. And we've just seen that he did anything but that. And we've had, I don't know how many hadiths now which were classified as authentic, as sahih, by Islamic scholars. So it's the texts themselves that show that Shamsi is not telling the truth. So I don't understand why he would do that when it is so blatantly obvious that Muhammad was the last to abolish slavery.
Easy.
Well, I think,
Easy.
hang on there, stops. Hang on a moment there. I think there's also, I mean, I think you and I would accept that, as far as we can tell, Muhammad did release some slaves, right? But there's
Sure.
a difference between letting some go or allowing Bilal to go, etc., and outlawing
abolishing
the
it.
practice, right? I think
Exactly.
there's a clear distinction between those two, and that mustn't be lost, right?
Exactly. Thunder, you said something?
Yeah, I forgot my points, but I think it was more of a reiteration of something that I've already said this evening anyway.
And
By
I
the
need
way,
to bring up
Reactionary,
my-
if you want to say something, just shout in loudly, because if we're speaking. So at any point you want to join in and you want to give us your thoughts, then just start speaking and I'll tell everybody, including myself, to shut up and you can speak, right?
Yeah, cheers,
So-
Rob. I've got one quick comment then. From what I was told when I asked about slavery to certain people I know in the Muslim community, the answer was that there is nothing in right. There's no Islamic text showing you how to go about obtaining slaves. So slavery is a practice that has existed in society, but Islam didn't show that it's something that's praiseworthy. However, there are many virtues in freeing slaves. So it's something that is encouraged in Islam, is to free slaves. And there are many ways in Islam. There are many different hadiths that show you that where an expiation for certain sins that you might do might be to free a slave. Or if you have a slave and certain circumstances come to pass, then you free that slave. There's no examples of obtaining slaves when you do certain things. It's actually freeing slaves. That's the virtuous thing to do. Sorry.
But does it not sort of like worry you though, Reactionary, that in order to free a slave, you have to have committed some kind of sin in the eyes of Allah, whereas having the slave and freeing him anyway, irrespective of what your conduct is in the eyes of Allah, that should be the priority of letting the slave go, not the sin that you or the accountability you have before the God that you worship, would be one point I raise. And second of all, you're saying that Islam doesn't teach you on how to get slaves. Well, it didn't have to teach you if you already had the skill set to obtain slaves in the first place. So you're saying that Islam didn't it doesn't condone, but it doesn't condemn slavery either, and that's the point, isn't it? It doesn't condemn, and it only seems to raise some kind of positive point is when you've got if you owe in God because of some kind of discrepancy in your conduct. So in effect, if you've gone and broken a law, that slave that you free has the value of the law that you've broken. So that actually reduces the slave to a crime, the value of the crime, rather than the dignity of the human being then.
Yeah, I'll say I wouldn't. I can see what you're trying to, what point you're making, but I don't agree with it because.
Of course, you're not going to agree with it. With respect.
Yeah, I'll tell you why though. The reason is when you do certain things and you have an expiation, the means of expiation is usually an action which is considered a good deed. Now, one of the good deeds you would do is to fast. Another of the good deeds you might do is to spend in charity. And another of the good deeds to do is to free a slave. It's not just expiation of sins where freeing a slave is mentioned as a good thing. I don't remember the exact hadiths, but there are narrations where freeing slaves is a good action to do. So what Islam did, although it didn't sort of necessarily condone slavery or condemn it, what it did is it regulated it. So where slaves may have been mistreated in the past, Islam says it put certain criteria in place in order to keep slaves. I guess you could compare it to gun ownership in the United States, where people have the right to bear arms, but you know that there's going to be mistreatment of that law. So you would put in place certain means to prevent, misuse of arms. So you put in place background checks, making sure that people have a license to bear arms, and that license needs to be renewed every so often. Likewise with cars, you have an MOT and a service that you have to do every year.
But I think reactionary, if we use your example of the guns, if we know that, let's just say we thought that that owning a firearm was a morally wrong action, right? And the government said, no, well, instead of banning something, we'll regulate it. Would we consider that the appropriate response to something that we agree is morally wrong?
So here is the point then. Is slavery in all of its forms morally wrong?
Yes, if we define slavery,
we'd have to agree on the definition. Yeah. Do you think there are ever circumstances in which being a slave could be a beneficial thing?
It depends what you mean, I guess, in the sense of like, could it be better to be a slave than to be dead or to torture to madness? You could bring up an example like that, but I could equally ask you, is there something better that one can do with one's fellow human being than enslaving them, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
But if we look at the hadiths here, right? They bought a slave, right? So when you buy something, that's property, right? You're buying something that's property. You don't buy servants. You will employ a servant, but you won't buy a servant. You will buy slaves, which is property, which is, ownership of something that is deemed to be your property, right?
Yeah, correct.
So I think your approach of saying, well, slavery today is not what it was then, in the sense of you saying or intimating that it might be a bit more like employment or being like a servant. These people were not free to leave, and they were bought, as it says there. And I think putting those two together, I think it's clear that they didn't have a choice, and they were not allowed to leave without severe consequences to their life or their physical, So
and also wives in the United Kingdom, like if you had a wife in the United Kingdom, let's say 200 years ago, she would be considered the husband's property.
I mean, that might well be the case.
Servant. Yeah, she was his property.
Okay, but reactionary. I mean, pointing to other religions and cultures doesn't clear Islam of this problem. What you're essentially doing is you are admitting that slavery was prominent, that Muhammad did it, but then saying, well, hang on a moment, you other guys were doing it 200 years ago. I'm not denying that we or anybody else did it, but we're not claiming that we had the moral authority from God, and we're certainly not claiming to follow that today. And I think that's where my point
mentioning the wife is that when we talk about a wife in the United Kingdom 200 years ago, we wouldn't put her on the same level as a slave when we think of a slave. So the term slave in our European mindset is something quite harsh and drastic. A person who would have received a dehumanizing position in society. In fact, I think in US law, it was considered they would have half the worth of a human being or something like that. What I'm trying to get at is Islam recognized them as human beings. It put in place regulations, and it recognizes that there may be circumstances in society where it can be beneficial for a person to be a slave.
You can't say you can keep slaves but do it nicely. That doesn't work. Okay, so
well, the fact is, slavery exists.
Why do you think that
in most of the world, slavery exists?
That's not the question. I said before, I don't care who started it. I care about who ended it. And this is the problem. Islam did not end it. Muhammad, okay, it doesn't matter. My question was, why do you think that a God would do that? You say, well, we don't question this. We just need to accept it. Okay, that's cool. But then if you say it's good that it is being regulated, wouldn't it be better to say, stop it?
That's from our perspective, but Allah is
Yeah,
more wise and knowing than us, right? So yeah, of course. Obviously, if it was better to say, from my perspective as a Muslim, if it was better to say stop it, Allah would have said stop it.
So you don't think it would have been better to say stop it?
No. No. And once again, when we say the word slavery, I'm not talking about the way you've just described it. I'm talking about Allah put in place certain regulations.
Yeah, but I mean, Reactionary, how you define it and how the Hadiths and the Quran define it are clearly different, because they do talk about buying and selling, which is property, and that's what we're talking about. You could buy them and have them sit at your table. That still makes them a slave. You could buy them, have them in the dog kennel outside. We're talking about the concept, not necessarily how you treat them. You could make an argument that are treated better than other places, but that's not the critique that we are leveling. So when you do mention that, that's outside of the critique, and it's not focused specifically on the critique of ownership of one human by another and prevention of them leaving you without some severe consequence. I think stops. Let's go on from here, otherwise we won't get much further here.
Yeah.
Okay. So
why did it?
I agree with you that there are some people, Muslims and Arabs, and these people wrongly without that, and it's vice versa. Me and you agree, except that because of something happened in the past. Because Allah told us in the Quran clearly, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. A person should not be responsible for a sin that was committed by someone else. But the reason I was talking to James, because James, one of his main targets to come to speak his corner, to give bad image about Islam, about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That's why I was showing him that don't you ever dare you to try to compare what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions did to European slavery. That was my main point. Okay? So I agree with you without any doubt. There were some people, Muslims and Arabs, did something evil and did enslave people wrongly without any doubt, and it's vice versa with the other nations. So we agree. Me and you agree, except that what we're talking about, there was no Islamic empire, their main target and business to go and enslave Africans. None of them did that. All right? None of that. All right? Salah. Now, I just want to mention something, which is I forgot to mention it when I was speaking to James. A nice benefit about, of course, Hamza will clarify that we're talking about the slavery issues, that we don't even use this term, that we're about the war captives. And I've clarified that there's no need to clarify it more. I just want to add something, that our Prophet ﷺ and Islam did not come to enslave the people. Rather, as been mentioned, the origin of mankind to be free. No one should be enslaving no one. Understand? As for from the Islamic perspective, then that issue deals with the war captives. Not you go and enslave free people. And there's something which Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there was many times, even the war captives, with the war captives, he let them go free, without any touching them. Sometimes, yes, if there's a wisdom behind keeping them, let them serve the Muslims.
Okay, this is where this is too much for me. Now, okay, I need to bring my old example, my favorite example of Muhammad telling his people, encouraging them to rape the female captives regardless of the prices. So Muhammad did not tell them, don't rape them. Muhammad did not tell them, let them go. Muhammad did not tell them, treat them with respect. Muhammad did not say any of those things. He says, enjoy raping them, enjoy having your orgasm, don't pull out, because God is going to decide. So his God is quite okay with these Muslims, and they say, we decided to have sex with them. It is not that we encourage or we inquired or we asked them and we were seeking their consent. No, we decided to have sex with them, and we were encouraged to enjoy ourselves to the hilt before we sold them on the slave market. So the only benefit, but Shamsi is not talking about that instance, the only benefit here was a nicer orgasm while they were raping the women. So we need to say, yes, there were instances where Muhammad encouraged the freeing of slaves, that he enslaved women himself, he enslaved people, he traded slaves, he exchanged slaves, he gave slaves as presents, he received a slave and had sex with a slave. And that we can't just say Muhammad did one thing, and that is encourage the freeing of slaves. You need to give the whole bandwidth of the picture, what happened here at the time.
Of them without.
Sorry, any comments?
Yeah, just stop there. Let's just make sure we put this up for people, because people might think you know. So here's Surah 4:3, right? And if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphan girls, then marry those that please of you other than women, 2, 3, or 4. But if you fear that you will not treat them, not be just, then marry only one, or those which your right hand possesses. So obviously that talks about what you possess, your property, i.e. slaves, right? And then if you read the hadith, here's the hadith about, we get female captives as our share of booty, and if we are interested in their prices, what is your opinion about coitus interruptus, us? The Prophet said, do you really do that? It is better for you not to do that. No soul which Allah has destined to exist, but will surely come into existence. So he's explicitly saying to them here, you don't have to withdraw before orgasm with regards to your booty, i.e. those that you have brought into slavery. So I think when you put that verse, that hadith together with this verse, that is what Stops is talking about with regards to raping your slaves. Because a lot of people go, oh, what are you talking about, right? You put those two together. At no point do these slaves, which are booty, have a choice about this matter. And so if they don't have a choice, and you say again?
There's a dozen of these. It's not only one.
Yeah, well, I'm just pointing out two in case people.
Yeah.
I mean,
but some people say, well, maybe it's only one. No, it's not. There's a dozen. There's more than a dozen.
By the way, that statement about withdrawal whilst having sexual relations, that doesn't just apply to your property, if you want to call it that. It also applies to your wives. But
yes.
Yeah, the
does it matter?
One of the points here that you could argue sort of against you is when a slave bears the child of a slave master, does she remain a slave, or does she become free?
As far as I know, she remains a slave.
As far as I'm pretty sure she'll be freed once she gives birth.
I mean, if you can provide a verse, that's fine. But I think again, I mean that's okay, right? So you are.
Sorry, I'm not an expert on this topic.
No,
I'm just speaking off what
that's fine. I think
what
and that's fine. You're entitled to obviously respond. That's why we asked you to come on here, right? If you just sit here and agree or keep quiet, then you know there's no value in that. And I certainly won't speak for my colleagues, but I am not expecting you to be a scholar, and I'm not it's not here to make you look foolish. What we're asking for is your response to certain things here, and to have a discussion, right? And you are pointing out things that could conceivably you could say, hey, this was better than what was happening, right? We could be charitable and grant that. Let's say that was the case, right? I think what I certainly am saying, again, won't speak for my colleagues, is that when Muhammad was in the cave, one of the things that could have happened was that Allah said to him, go now forth and be my spokesperson, and the power of Allah will be with you wherever you go, and go out and tell everybody that I, Allah, stop slavery in all forms from this moment on, the moment that you and I first met. Now, if that was in the Quran in the first, we could all agree that that was a moral act. Whatever happened before, we could all agree that was the case. And I think, as you agree, that didn't happen. There was some encouragement to treat them better. There was some encouragement to let some of them go. But then we've also got these verses here about what your right hand possesses and so forth. So at the same time, he might have been saying that, but at no point did he outlaw it. And in fact, he was encouraged them to do certain things with the, quote, war booty. So I think there's a lot of things going on here. And the question to yourself is, do you see this as a moral example to follow today? or would you say that that was slightly better at the time and that's where you're going to leave it?